Backyard Professor Chess videos. I'm here up in the lovely Taylor Mountain area, and I'm going to give us a fun Chessercise. This is out of one of my very favorite grandmasters of chess, Andy Soltis. This was a 1978 book, Chess to Enjoy, a king's treasury of chess stories and unusual games and problems for budding masters, sideline kibitzers, and rainy Sunday afternoon beginners. Well, that certainly describes me. This is a delightful book. It's fascinating. There's some fun, amusing games. There's some interesting puzzles. There's some great concepts that Soltis shares, showing that chess can be fun and at the same time we can learn. Now, Chessercises, from my definition, is puzzles, games, or else board analysis that helps us learn how to decipher the chessboard so that we know which pieces are best to move, so that we understand the position of the board, so that we know which side of the board to play on, so that we can develop a plan and a strategy based on imbalances, weaknesses, or the ability to create weaknesses. And this is kind of a fun Chessercise that's going to make us think. And there's nothing wrong with that, I don't think. Clearly, as we explore this board, black has been completely outplayed. But we know it's a chess puzzle anyway, so it's not about the game as such. It's about our powers of observation. And here's how Soltis describes this. He says, "This is the kind of the problem that Sherlock Holmes would have loved. The only significant reference to chess, direct or indirect, in the Conan Doyle stories shows Holmes taking a dim view of the game. One suspect, the great sleuth told his colleague, was a chess player. One Mark Watson of a scheming mind. But chess fans who have a lot in common with mystery readers, we harbor strong feelings for Holmes, and every few years a new piece of chess fiction appears starring the detective." This idea here is that white mates black in one move. So, what I want to do is explore this chessboard with you as Soltis describes it, and let's see what we find. All right, I want to do a close-up of this board so that you can see it, because this is going to be an interesting puzzle. The idea with this puzzle, and the clue, is the Sherlock Holmes reference. The red herring is the attempt to solve the problem by retrograde analysis, and to come to the conclusion that black's last move was something. But I'm not going to tell you just yet. This is very fascinating how we look at this, because white to checkmate in one. Well, obviously the king is fairly well surrounded. The white king has opposition. The knight isn't going to necessarily do anything in this game, is he? The queen can come up to here and take the pawn, but there's the one move, and it's not a checkmate, is it? So that doesn't work. This is a tricky problem. The bishop can come up here and put the king in check, but there's a problem here. Do you see the problem? That's not possible. And you go, what do you mean it's not possible? It's not possible. Look at the board carefully. This is so intriguing how this board is set up. We must work backwards to find a clue. What if we recognize that this dark squared bishop can't be there? Because when we look at the board, we notice there's a pawn here on b2 and a pawn here on d2, and that's where the bishop originated from. But he could have never gotten off of his square, could he? Ooh, a trick. So the bishop can't be there. Can he? How do we checkmate this king? The rook can't come to here because his pawn's blocking him, obviously. The rook can't come to here and deliver check. The pawn could go in and promote to something, but that doesn't help checkmate the king in one move, right? White to checkmate in one move. Here's the idea. This is what makes our observations so important and interesting. The queen can't come up to here. The queen can't take the pawn. There's no way to get to that black king. So the idea is to come to the conclusion that black's last move was from pawn 2 to pawn knight 4. So white can en passant check the king, right? Or is that right? Can this happen? Let's explore this. Why would that be black's last move, though? Because it couldn't be. Pawn from knight 3 to pawn knight 4, because that would have meant that white's previous move left his king in check to a pawn. You see that? Because black is coming this way. So the black pawn couldn't have been here because the white king's in check, and that would mean that black moved his pawn to get the king out of check. Well, that doesn't make any sense either. Look around the board at the other pieces. What about the bishop on king rook 2, he says. I pointed that out. Where did it come from? It didn't originally come from here, because those squares are still occupied by pawns. Therefore, this bishop on king rook 2 was promoted by a pawn at some distant point in the past. Right? A pawn got in. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pawns, so obviously the pawn got in and promoted to a bishop instead. But what about white's other bishop? It could not have been promoted for a very simple reason. There are 7 pawns on the board, and the one accounted for, the one used to create this bishop here. So the bishop on queen rook 8 is the original king bishop. Therefore, it could not have gotten to queen rook 8 by going through a black pawn there. At some distant past, it was somewhere in the field. So how did that bishop get there if black's last move was from there to there? You see how that works? Well, that exhausts every possibility, it seems. Black couldn't have moved the pawn the last move, and he couldn't have moved his king either. Where could it have come from? All of the adjacent squares are under heavy enemy fire, so this is legally not possible for the king to even be there. So, remember, it says white to mate in one move. And clearly this position at this point on the board must be black to move. It says white to mate in 1. But the trick is, it's black's move. And he does that through a series of analysis of the chessboard position. That's kind of fun, isn't it? So he plays pawn knight 5, and now he's mated by queen to rook 6. And his conclusion is, I told you this was a tricky puzzle. So that's a fun little Chessercise. Let's look at now another interesting game while I'm at it. All right, now I want to play a game played by David Bronstein. He was in a match, and he got to a certain point in the game, and the game was adjourned, and he dreamed the solution. He analyzed all the different variations, but he actually dreamed the solution, and then when they came back to play the game, he played his dream solution. This is a very interesting idea here. Pawn, queen 4. It's a typical pawn, queen opening. Knight, queen, bishop 3. Bishop comes out to knight 5, putting the question to the knight. And his opponent puts the question to his knight as well. And now, pawn, king, rook 3 here. Putting the question to the bishop. The bishop drops back to rook 4. Queen comes up to king 2. Knight pulls out to bishop 3 here. Pawn comes up to queen 3. Notice he is solidifying his central squares by bringing the pawns up together as buddies, side by side. They're in this thick and thin, right? Well, queen comes up here and goes check, with the possibility of nabbing the bishop. But the knight comes out, blocking the check and supporting the bishop. So that didn't work, right? Pawn pushes the pinned piece here. Very interesting, isn't it? Well, of course, the pawn takes the pawn. And the pawn takes the pawn, still threatening to take that pinned piece, right? Rather than addressing that issue, this is where Bronstein dreamed his solution. This is so fascinating. Queen comes up to king 5. Now look at the threat here. This is so interesting. One, he's addressing the bishop, of course. But the next threat is the bishop takes the knight, check, and the queen will take the queen, right? So that's a pretty good, strong move. Well, his opponent pushes the knight to cover that interesting threat, and of course putting the question to the queen and the queen, because he's got his knight pinned. So now Bronstein has pinned his knight so that he can't take the queen. It's a great threat. That's quite a move. Well, the knight comes down to queen 2. Now the queen takes the bishop. And of course, the pawn takes the knight. So they're exchanging powers down. At this point, notice something interesting and controversial. He castles out of the problem. The queen rook comes up to challenge the bishop. And watch what Bronstein does. He ignores the problem with the bishop and brings his knight to knight 5. Well, of course, the knight pawn is going to put the question to the bishop, because he's kind of getting an interesting combination going on down here on the king, right? Well, the queen comes back up here to bishop 3. Once again, double attacking a piece. And all this while, he's leaving his bishop threatened to be taken, right? Well, his opponent finally says, okay, if you're not going to move that, then of course I'll take it. But watch what he does now. Check. Now he's going, oh, whoops. That was not such a hot move. Watch now. Pawn to queen knight 4. He's going to come up and threaten the queen. So the queen drops back to queen knight 3. You notice how Bronstein is keeping the initiative. What he is doing is he is making threats. He's making sure that he keeps his pressure on the king. At the same time, he's building up his position by keeping the initiative, making white respond to him. This is a very important concept to know in chess. Now he's bringing out another piece of his army, again threatening the queen, keeping the initiative, and developing his army all at the same time. This is what the grandmasters do so very well in chess. This is great to see. So the queen hops over here to queen rook 3, right? Now the knight comes down to here, check. Very interesting. He is keeping the initiative. Every play Bronstein moves, he's making his opponent react to him. He's on the defense is what's going on. And now he goes queen, king 8, check. Knight goes to queen 1. And queen, of course, takes the knight, checkmate. That's a fascinating game that he dreamed up, isn't it? Isn't that interesting how that variation came to him in his sleep? So, here is the exciting news for us. As we do our Chessercises, as we analyze Grandmaster games, as we're learning how to improve our chess, not only does this work during the daytime while we're making our analysis, exploring the different positions on the chessboards, we now know that this can also work for us at night when we start dreaming. Isn't that encouraging? Anyway, there's your Chessercises. 2 in 1 video. You're welcome. Thanks for watching my videos. I'm having a lot of fun making these. It's a ball to learn how to improve our chess, to see how the grandmasters constantly do it. That's fun. So happy checkmating, happy chessercising and chess study, and I will see you in the next video.